Om Jananim Sharadam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhur. Today we are going to study Sri Ramakrishna on knowledge and devotion, Jnana Mishrita Bhakti. How Sri Ramakrishna shows us how to combine knowledge and devotion to make this an effective path towards our spiritual goal. So many devotees asked me to dwell on this because sometimes it happens that we are in a great mood of jnana, a great mood of knowledge, and sometimes we are in a deep bhav of bhakti. So Sri Ramakrishna's Jnana Mishrita Bhakti, it is a very effective way to combine both these tendencies in us to take us towards the supreme goal of life. After all, the goal is the same. It is the knowledge of Brahman, God realization, what we say, and it can be done by harmonizing paths. This is the great message of Sri Ramakrishna. This is the great message which Swami Vivekananda has spoken about. So they were masters of harmonization. By harmonizing path, we even more speedily go towards the goal. If you see the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, that wonderful book which is the very essence of wisdom, God's wisdom, there you will find Sri Ramakrishna repeatedly saying, Shuddha Bhakti or Shuddha Jnana, Ak. Pure devotion and pure knowledge are one and the same thing. They are not different. They appear different in their Vaidhi stages, in their preliminary stages. But as we proceed towards God, we will see that they combine, they sort of intermix and they lead us together towards the same goal. And in their higher stages, they appear to be the same. So Shuddha Bhakti and Shuddha Jnana, pure devotion and pure knowledge, are not two different things. And Sri Ramakrishna has very clearly pointed out to this also. When do we need to practice bhakti? He says, as long as a man is not well established in samadhi, as long as he is in the jurisdiction of Shakti, it is important for him to practice devotion, because he can only relate with Sagun Sakar Upasana. That is why for Sagun Sakar Upasana, which means worshipping God with attributes and with a form, for that then bhakti becomes very important. So it is a kind of constitutional necessity as long as we are bound to this body and mind, as long as we are under the jurisdiction of Shakti. You can only relate with God with attributes, God with form. And that is why Sakar Upasana is there. That is why Sagun Upasana, Bhakti is there. So you see, it is not that whether, it's not a matter of choice. I choose to be aspirant on the path of knowledge. It's not like that. It depends on how we are made, of how we are constituted. And actually, if you observe and see, every human being has all of these faculties of thought, intellect, emotion, will, the meditative nature, the propensity towards action. Since we are a combination of all of this, it is always better to harmonize all the paths, all the yogas, Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga, in order to move towards the supreme goal of life. So Sri Ramakrishna is very clear about this. If you actually read the spiritual history of India, many of these paths were exclusive in the past and were at loggerheads with other paths also. But after the coming of Sri Ramakrishna, we see the supreme harmony coming into the spiritual realm, a harmony of all paths and everything accepted. In fact, every faith is a path towards the supreme, and every faith can be combined. Every path can be combined with other paths in order to achieve the supreme goal of human life, which is only one for every life. God realization, the highest reach of the human consciousness lies in God consciousness. So somehow to attain that, that's the whole purpose. Sri Ramakrishna gives this very beautiful parable in places in the Gospel. What is the nature of God? You cannot restrict God to just one small little understanding of your intellect. He is much, much more besides that. Your intellect itself is working within very definite epistemic limits, very limited parameters. So how can you determine or interpret the ultimate through such a feeble instrument? That is why sadhana is required. And the nature of God is both with form, without form, again beyond that also. Sri Ramakrishna used to say this when anybody asked him, what is the nature of God? Is God with form or formless? He would say he is with form, again he is without form, again he is beyond both these, and he is many other things besides. Sri Ramakrishna would say this. And then he would give this beautiful illustration of, you see, there is a sea of water. There is so much of water in a sea, in an ocean, say. And this water, when there's a very cold influence falling on this water, it condenses into ice. So you have all these wonderful icebergs and of so many shapes, so many sizes. And they are all condensations of that same water. Water has become ice. It takes form. And again, when the sun arises, when it gets warm during the day, this iceberg melts back into water. So Sri Ramakrishna says, God, Brahman, he can take any form. Under the cooling influence of the Bhakta's love, the infinite one becomes finite. The formless one takes form. Again, when the sun of knowledge arises, this very form merges into the formless. So you see, let us not try to limit God with our little intellects, rather through sadhana. And it is only through sadhana that the knowledge of God can be got. It is through sadhana that one attains to his state, knows him as he is. And that is why you see there is this very beautiful prayer of Saint Francis of Assisi, which I often quote. He would say, "O Lord, let me only have that knowledge which is born of prayer." So also we should be able to say, may I only have that knowledge which is born of sadhana, of intense spiritual practice. Without that, knowledge is not complete, because knowledge here is the unfoldment of the highest awareness in you, in the first person. That is the nature of this knowledge. So it has to be done to be known. It happens in your own system. And that is why spiritual practice is the only way we understand all of this, everything about spiritual life. Vivekananda very clearly pointed out that these 4 yogas, they are not 4 watertight compartments, and they are not selected by choice, as it were. I like this yoga, so I will practice. It's not like that. They are constitutional. They are a constitutional necessity with us, because we have all these faculties, as I said, of intelligence, of emotion, will, and the propensity towards action, and the meditative mind. Since we have all of this, all of the yogas require to be combined. In fact, if you check and see, emotion itself shines bright when there is awareness supporting it. That emotion which shines in full awareness is called Bhakti. And that awareness which unfolds by one-pointed devotion towards it is called jnana. So these are not different things actually. Through sadhana, we understand the place of all of this in our lives. There is one very beautiful observation made by a great saint who was actually a perfect combination of bhakti and jnana. His name was Madhusudan Saraswati, and he was a great Advaitin initially who turned over to bhakti. So he has written on both, on Advait Vedanta as well as on bhakti. So he makes this very powerful observation. He says, Dvaitam mohaya bodhat prak prapte bodhe manishaya bhaktyartham kalpitam dvaitam advaitadapi sundaram. It means to say, ordinarily emotion or this dualistic attitude, it appears like an obstacle. It is an obstacle to the unawakened. Before bodha, before the dawn of knowledge. The attitude of mere duality is a kind of, it is not enough, it is not sufficient. But once one attains full awareness, complete illumination, then that attitude of duality, which is deliberately posited for the sake of bhakti, is even more beautiful than the knowledge of Advaita, the knowledge of non-duality. So you see, this is the position of the sadhak, that emotion which is inspired by awareness, full awareness shining behind it, and which is directed only towards God. That is a very ennobling, this is what is called bhav samadhi. It takes you directly to the nature of God. So this observation of Madhusudan Saraswati comes true in our spiritual life. If we practice sadhana like that, you will find this beautifully demonstrated again and again in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. Let me tell you here a remarkable incident which I recently read again. Many times we keep reading the gospel again and again because every time you read it, it will give you fresh insights. It is a book of realization, of a mind merged in God. That is why every time you read it, it will appear new. Every time you read it, it will appear sweeter. Every time you read it, it will give you more and more. So this particular incident in Sri Ramakrishna demonstrates the point which we have been discussing. See, the incident is like this. Once M is the author of the gospel, Mahendranath Gupta, author of the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He would visit Sri Ramakrishna in Dakshineshwar now and then, and he would see the incidents there, the words of the master, and he would go and record it in his diary at home. This is how finally the gospel was produced. Now, one day he is in the Dakshineshwar Kali temple. He enters the master's room. He sees that Sri Ramakrishna has just had his lunch, the prasad from the Kali temple, and he then sits on his cot. Sri Ramakrishna sits on his cot and then lies down for a few minutes. M is sitting at his feet, watching him. Not on the cot, but on the ground. He is sitting close to the master and seeing the master. Sri Ramakrishna gets up in a few minutes and then turning towards M, he says, "You know, I had this experience." He talks about his Advaitic experience. He says, "I saw that all living beings are as it were pills made of consciousness. Only consciousness appearing in particular forms. I was once traveling from Kamarpukur to Bardwan," Sri Ramakrishna says, "and on the way we came across a meadow. I entered the meadow. He would like vast spaces. So he entered the meadow, and what did he see? He saw the whole place and all its living beings teeming with consciousness. He says, I saw a line of ants crawling in that meadow, and from that I saw only the light of consciousness. I saw Brahman. Then he says, living beings appear to me like so many flowers in different stages of bloom. The different whorls of petals are in different stages of bloom. They appear to me like that." Saying this, Sri Ramakrishna suddenly entered into an abstract mood and plunged into samadhi. He went into deep samadhi for a long time. M was simply stunned looking at Sri Ramakrishna. See, that very same photo of Sri Ramakrishna which we worship, just like that, like a picture, he is sitting there, absorbed within himself, radiating bliss on his face. Now and then a few teardrops appear at the corner of his eyes, but he is absolutely still and as it were immersed in God consciousness, in supreme joy. M sits and watches the master. After a long time, Sri Ramakrishna comes out of this state of samadhi, and then he says, before he says something, M notices that his eyes are swimming in bliss. His face is beaming with joy. Then he stands up and starts pacing the room slowly. Then he comes back to M and says, you know that Paramahamsa under the banyan tree in Dakshineshwar, he walks somewhat like this. Then he gives a very remarkable teaching. He says, see, when one gets rid of desire and grief, one attains to this state. What a magnificent, precious teaching this is. When one gets rid of desire and grief, sorrow, one attains to this state. M sees clearly the state of the Paramahamsa in him, immersed in bliss, exuding bliss, unable to control the joy in his heart. So Sri Ramakrishna has become like that. Then again he sits on the small couch and then he starts saying, at once he connects with the Divine Mother. He enters the consciousness of Sagun Brahman and starts speaking with the Divine Mother, his Mother Kali. He says, oh Mother, I have no desire for the objects of this world, but Mother, I have desire for your lotus feet. I have desire for bhakti. A Paramhamsa also is a child, Mother. Doesn't a child need a mother? So you are the mother and I am the child. And he went on like this in such sweet words, with such bhav, intensity of emotion, that M writes, it would have melted a stone. This is Sri Ramakrishna's bhav at this stage, and M is simply stunned to see this whole scene. Just imagine, keep your mind in Dakshineshwar and let us look at this blissful image of the Master for some time. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, he again starts praying to the Mother, the dry knowledge of Advaita, I don't want it, Mother. He says, I want blissful devotion to your lotus feet. The Paramhamsa also is a child. Doesn't a child need a mother? And again he plunged into Samadhi. M sitting at his feet is now simply overwhelmed at this, and he looks at the Master and he starts thinking. See, Sri Ramakrishna himself says, Advaita Chaitanya Nityananda. This is what a man experiences on attaining the highest knowledge. This is not a sequence. These are synonyms. Advait, the knowledge of non-duality, the perception of complete unitary consciousness that comes only when there is Chaitanya, the awakening into full consciousness, the blossoming forth of full pure awareness, Brahman, and naturally follows Nityananda, great eternal bliss. So these three are actually synonyms. They indicate the same state, and that is verily what the Master is in right now. M sees this clearly. He is exuding that state, showing live demonstration of the highest truths of our scriptures. He is seeing in the very persona of the Master. So this incident clearly shows us, you see, the place of bhakti and jnana. The avatar comes to teach us the highest wisdom, and Sri Ramakrishna clearly show how these two alternate, how these two intermix, and in the life of sadhana, what an important role they play. So bhakti and jnana are to be practiced together until we reach the complete fruition of this bhakti and jnana. Then they will be found to be one and the same state. They both point to the same state. That is why you find this beautiful description in the words of Hanumanji, which also we often quote, when Sri Ram asks him, how do you look upon me? Hanumanji says, Deha buddhyatu dasosmi. As long as I am attached, or in a sense identified with this body, I can only be your servant. I can only relate with the Sagun Sakar aspect. And Deha buddhya dasosmi jiva buddhya tvad amshakaha. When I am the jiva, when I consider myself to be the embodied soul, then I am a part of you. Atma buddhya tvamevaham iti me nishchitamati. But when I know myself to be pure consciousness, the Atman, then I am verily you. Where am I different then from you, your real nature? So you see, this is the perfect perception of the spiritual life and the different stages of unfoldment in the spiritual life. So, and what a beautiful explanation of the three systems of Vedant: dualism, qualified non-dualism, and monism. So you see, our relationship with God, it is only to be seen as what I can do, what is real to me just now. How do I look upon myself? That way I will be able to relate to God. It proceeds like that. Bhakti and jnana like that. And if we take up only a philosophical standpoint or a standpoint of only jnana, we will not know what to do with our emotional side. And that is why a combination, a harmonization of these paths is required. In the life of great spiritual masters, you will see this harmonization has come about sometime or the other in their life. Even Sri Ramakrishna's own Vedanta Guru, Totapuri, who had attained the state of Supreme Consciousness Brahman after great austerity for more than 40 years. He had attained Nirvikalpa Samadhi, and he would not accept Shakti, the Divine Mother. He also was taught the importance of Shakti by Mother herself. So many Advaitins come to this in these ways. The story of Totapuri is very beautiful. It will teach us a lot about Bhakti and Jnana. So let us go a bit into this beautiful historical record of Sri Ramakrishna's Vedanta sadhana under Totapuri. Totapuri was the typical stern ascetic who had attained the highest mainly through discipline. And he knew that the indomitable human will can attain this highest goal. He felt that the human intellect can grasp the nature of Brahman. He himself had attained it that way through Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And so when he came to Dakshineshwar, he actually did not go to the Kali temple. He had never believed in anything other than this supreme goal of life. So he did not acknowledge Shakti, as it were, the Divine Mother. When he first saw Sri Ramakrishna, he felt that this is a young man who is fit for Vedant. So he asked him, would you like to learn Vedant from me? Sri Ramakrishna immediately said, I will ask my mother. And Totapuri thought, he's a young man, maybe he's attached to his mother, his biological mother, he will ask her and come. So he said, okay, ask your mother and come. And Sri Ramakrishna went straight to the Kali temple. And he asked the Divine Mother, Mother, should I learn this? And Mother said, yes, Totapuri has come here for this purpose. Get the knowledge of Vedant from him. So then Sri Ramakrishna comes back and agrees and then takes formal sannyas under Totapuri and then begins his great Vedanta sadhana. So Totapuri tells him to meditate, to concentrate here at the Agnya Chakra between the eyebrows and plunge into the state of pure consciousness which you are, the Atman, which is your real nature. Now Sri Ramakrishna sits in meditation, but who is his obstacle? It is the Divine Mother herself, that beloved form to which he has complete devotion. Because of the great Sagun Sakar Upasana he has done, he is only devoted to Mother. He has no other distraction in his life. His mind again and again plunges at the lotus feet of the Divine Mother Kali. And he is not able to take her form out of his mind. So he tries again and again. When he is not able to do it, he tells Totapuri. Totapuri says, what do you mean you can't do it? And then he takes a shard of pottery or glass, something which was fallen there, and pierces between the eyebrows of Sri Ramakrishna and just pierces here and tells him to concentrate there. And then Sri Ramakrishna plunges into meditation when Totapuri instructs him sternly that with the sword of knowledge, cut any form which comes into your mind into two. Cut the form of the Divine Mother into two. What it means to say is, it's a figurative way of saying transcend name and form. transcend name and form, enter the state of pure awareness. So this is actually what happens when Sri Ramakrishna sits in meditation. Again, the blissful form of the Divine Mother appears in his mind, and his whole mind is at her feet. But then he remembers his stern resolve, and he, as it were, cuts the mother into two with the sword of knowledge, plunges into the state of pure consciousness, which is Brahman. So authentic was Sri Ramakrishna's meditation that for 3 days and 3 nights after that, he is in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, sitting there like a statue, absolutely unmoving, completely absorbed in Brahman. So Totapuri is taken aback. He thinks he has attained this state in 3 days, in 1 day, and he is in this state for 3 days and 3 nights continuously, not coming out of the state at all. Totapuri himself had attained it after hard spiritual discipline for 40 years. So you see here, you see the importance of Sagun Sakar Upasana. It is a way of collecting your mind and completely dedicating at the feet of the Sagun aspect of God. Once it has got this devotion, once it has got this discipline, it will naturally plunge into the state of supreme consciousness. It will naturally transcend name and form. So Sri Ramakrishna shows us after 3 days, Totapuri comes and makes efforts to bring back Sri Ramakrishna's mind into normal consciousness. When he enters that kutia, he sees Sri Ramakrishna still plunged in Nirvikalpa Samadhi, absolutely motionless. One cannot say whether he is breathing or not, whether the heartbeat is there or not. So he makes efforts, Hari Om chanting, to bring Sri Ramakrishna back into the normal state of consciousness. Gradually Sri Ramakrishna's mind comes down to normal consciousness, and the bliss on his face, and Guru and disciple embrace each other. So this is how Sri Ramakrishna attained the goal of Vedanta. Now Totapuri is very happy, but he does not return back. You see, he was a wandering monk who would stay in any place for just 3 days so that he doesn't get attached to the place. But in Dakshineshwar, he stayed on for 11 months in the company of Sri Ramakrishna, in the holy precincts of the Kali temple. He stayed there, and in this time, the Divine Mother Kali herself taught him those lessons which he had not learnt, in the sense he had not acknowledged the presence of Shakti. So the Divine Mother had her own plans of making him acknowledge that. So one day he had a severe bout of dysentery and so much of pain in the stomach. Now from his standpoint, this was something too much. The inconceivable had happened. His mind was descending to his body, to the pain in his stomach. And he could not bear this. That mind, which was every day used to plunging in supreme consciousness, it is coming down to the body. So this was unbearable for him. So he decided, now he will get rid of the body. Of what use is the body? After all, the body has helped him attain the state of the actual goal of human life. So now it is of no more use. So one day at night, he slowly moved towards the Ganga. For those of you who have been to Dakshineshwar, the Ganga there is quite a huge expanse of water. So Totapuri's plan was to drown his body in the Ganga. So this kind of Jala Samadhi, he thought it suited him, because after all he had attained the supreme goal of human life. So he moved towards the waters. As he entered into the Ganga, he gradually waded deeper and deeper into the Ganga. He waded and waded, but the ground was always under his feet. There was not water enough in the Ganga to drown him. He saw this clearly. And he was so surprised. He almost reached the other shore. Now he thought, what kind of a divine Maya is this? What kind of a miracle is going on? I am not able to drown myself in the Ganga. There is not enough water in the Ganga to drown me. And he returned back. Again, the ground was under his feet all the time. So when he returned back, he understood that there is some other power which guides human life and human destiny. As long as you are an embodied soul, this power works. It is so beautifully put. Shakti Tattva is to be understood. All of our living and dying, our striving or not striving, our yoga, our meditation, our Vedant, all of that is taking place where? It is taking place in the realm of our mind. Until we transcend this mind, one has to acknowledge this divine power. So this divine power guides our destiny. It guides our will. Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti, all is verily Shakti. Our striving, our sadhana is she herself. Our very perceptions, our sensations, the work of our senses, our motor organs is all verily she. She is our heart beating. She is our lungs performing their function. Other than pure consciousness, everything else is in the realm of Prakriti. It is she alone. How can you not admit this? So, the way to Brahman lies through her. All sadhana, that is why is actually Shakti sadhana. It is done in the realm of Shakti. That is why Sri Ramakrishna said, as long as you are in the jurisdiction of Shakti, the way is through her. By appeasing her, worshipping her, sadhana is in her realm, obviously. So that is why the way is through her. And Totapuri intensely felt the truth of this the whole of that night. When he came back from the Ganga front, he spent in meditation on the Divine Mother. He lit a dhuni fire and spent the life in meditation of that Divine Shakti, who is actually responsible for our action or our non-action, who is responsible for everything in our lives. And he understood what the Divine Mother was. He grasped this Shakti Tattva. And the next day morning, he went to the Kali temple. First time he set foot in the Kali temple, and Sri Ramakrishna went with him. They bowed down to Mother Kali with so much of devotion. Totapuri understood the play of the mother. And when they came out, Sri Ramakrishna told him, see, that is why I always say, Brahma Shakti Ak. Brahman and my mother are not different. That is like the stationary aspect of consciousness. This is like consciousness in motion. But they are the same thing. So you cannot but admit Shakti. This is how Totapuri understood the importance of Shakti. See, if sadhana has to become successful, we must understand the realm in which our faculties are operating. As long as we do not touch pure awareness, you are in the realm of Shakti. So the way is through all these upasanas. That is why the Bhakti mark becomes so very important. See, Sri Ramakrishna's mind could immediately plunge into Nirvikalpa Samadhi for the simple reason Savikalpa Samadhi was so easy for him. His whole being was tuned to the Divine Mother. Constantly he lived in her light. He had her vision. That is why it was so easy for him to transcend that one form and immediately touch the formless. So, Bhakti and Jnana, they are complementary, they crisscross, they are to be practiced together. And don't compartmentalize these yogas. This is the supreme message of Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna would look at Swamiji's face and say, look at his face. Can a dry Jnani have such a beautiful face? He is full of bhakti. He is a bhakta at heart. He appears to be a Jnani. And Vivekananda would say of Sri Ramakrishna that, he appeared to be like a bhakta in the outside, but he was full of knowledge in his heart. So you see how they have cultivated their inner life. You can see through all these expressions. Some of the greatest jnanis, take Shankaracharya's case for instance. Even he, the supreme expounder of Advaita, he himself again was introduced to the Shakti Tattva by Mother, the Divine Mother herself. She showed him, she took the form of a woman because even Shankara was not acquainted with, as it were, with the power of the Divine Mother. She sat on a ghat with a corpse behind her, beside her. And when Shankaracharya was passing, he just asked for a little space to take his bath in the Ganga in Varanasi. And the Divine Mother clearly told him, why don't you ask the corpse to move? According to you, all is Brahman. So even if this was only Brahman, then it should move when you say, but why doesn't it move? Then it struck Shankaracharya. Why doesn't it move? Although Brahman is there, it is another expression of Brahman, because Brahman is not co-joined with Shakti, not conjoined with Shakti there. That is why it cannot move. Only when consciousness conjoins with Shakti, energy, manifestation as life becomes possible. So that is why there is no life there. So the Shakti Tattva hit him at that point. It is so very important. In our life of sadhana also, we must acknowledge this. This is how great jnanis also have come to the understanding of the actual realm, the adhishtan of sadhana and the adhishtatri, who is the Divine Mother. I can also give you the example of Raman Maharshi. He attained the supreme knowledge of Brahman. He stayed in that consciousness. But you know, when the lives of great devotees, the Alvars and Namalvars, all these were read out in his presence, he would shed tears of joy. He would be so moved. And those who have recorded this, those devotees have written that it was a sight for the gods to see, a jnani weeping with devotion for the saints. So bhakti and jnana are there in every realized life. Let us go a little into Vedanta to understand these aspects of jnana and bhakti. See, in Vedanta, Brahman is described as Satchidananda. He is of the very nature of existence, consciousness and bliss. Not that he is existing or he is conscious or he is blissful. He is the very nature of existence. Anything existing is Brahman. Anything that is conscious is Brahman. Anything that is blissful is Brahman. He is verily the essence of this. But this, how does it translate in first person experience? This appears like an objective definition of Brahman. In our own system, it translates as Asti, Bhati and Priya. See, I am. This is the fundamental experience of our existence which we have, isn't it? I am. Being. This amness which we feel. This is Brahman in our own system, in our own being, in the first person. And how does Chit, consciousness, express itself? As the shine of conscious experience. The awareness that we feel within us. So that is called Bhati. And how does the Ananda aspect of Brahman translate into our own system? As Priya, the dearness of anything. You see, any object that is dear, any person who is dear, anything that is dear in your life is a reflection of the Ananda aspect of Brahman. So Ananda and Priya constitute Bhakti in the Upanishads, in Vedic thought. They are actually expressions of Bhakti. In fact, Mahapurush Maharaj, Swami Shivananda, the great disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, he would say the Upanishads are actually Bhakti Shastras. They expound Bhakti because you have the statement Raso Vaisaha in the Upanishad. Brahman is of the very nature of Rasa. He is the very juice, the essence of life. So there are these beautiful expressions of Bhakti scattered in the Upanishads. If you go to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there is this marvelous teaching of Yajnavalkya being given to his wife Maitreyi. He says, and there's a lot to learn from this. He says, Nava are patyu kamaya pati priyo bhavati, atmanastu kamaya pati priyo bhavati. Nava are jayaye kamaya jaya priyo bhavati, atmanastu kamaya jaya priyo bhavati. What he's trying to tell her is, you see, nobody is dear for their own sake. But because of the presence of the Atman, that person becomes dear. That thing becomes dear. Even a husband is loved, not for the sake of the husband, but because there is consciousness shining there. There's the Atman present there. That is why that inspires love. Everything that is loved in life, you see, it is because of the expression of consciousness. The expression of consciousness is what is called life. You cannot love a mountain as you would love your mother. Why? The more the expression of consciousness, the more relatable the love. The dearer you feel that person is. We form a relationship. So you see, whatever expresses consciousness, we relate to, we love, it becomes dear to us. What does not express consciousness? A corpse cannot express consciousness because there's no life. There is no medium for the expression of that consciousness. So how can you love a corpse? So this is why the very expression of life is due to the presence of consciousness. You actually love consciousness alone. That is what makes things and people dear to us. It is such a magnificent description of love. What is love? Human life attains maturity as it attains maturity in its understanding of love. Love depends on consciousness. The more consciousness manifests, the deeper and better and more stable, more mature will be our love. So these beautiful expressions are again from the Upanishads. And of course the Bhakti Shastras. Very beautifully, you see, even in the Bhakti Shastras, if you go to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is Bhakti at its peak, there in the works of Jiva Goswami, you will find the description of Bhagwan, the Sagun Sakar aspect of God, given in this form. You see, they say Bhagwan has his Swarupa Shakti, which is made up of 3 elements. What are those 3 elements? They are called Sandhini Shakti, Samvit and Ladini Shakti. Sandhini Shakti corresponds to the Sat aspect of Brahman. Samvit corresponds to the Chit aspect of Brahman, consciousness. And Ladini corresponds to the Ananda aspect of Brahman. This Ladini aspect is what gives joy, bhakti, devotion to the Supreme Lord. So the Lord has this inbuilt power to give these 3 Shaktis, through these 3 Shaktis, to attract the human soul to himself. So you see the understanding of Bhakti and Jnana. Where there is consciousness, there will be the highest bliss, always. And the actually Bhakti and Bhav is the pure emotion that shines in complete awareness. So you see, you can't differentiate these things. These are not different elements which we can study separately. They are to be understood through sadhana. That is why. Now we will go into a little bit into the Bhagavatam, which also has a very beautiful understanding of Bhakti and Jnana. See, the Bhagavatam is the most sublime scripture on Bhakti, because the great philosophy of the Upanishads, if you want to find it in rasatmak form, in a very beautiful, juicy form, the great understanding of the Upanishads, you will find it in a Bhakti format in the Bhagavatam. So there you have this King Parikshit, who is hearing this scripture, the Bhagavat, from the mouth of Shukadev, the great knower of Brahman, who is expounding the Bhagavat. Now Parikshit has only 7 days to live, so he is all attention. He wants to hear the story of the Lord, so that he is able to attain supreme devotion and he is able to liberate himself in this very life. He has only 7 days to live. So when he comes to the Dasham Skand, Krishna Lila in the Bhagavad, Parikshit has a question. He asks Shukdev, "O great sage, I do not understand one point in Krishna Lila. Please explain it to me." Then Shukdev says, "Yes, Parikshit, please tell me what is it." Then Parikshit says, "You see, God incarnates in order to bring about righteousness, in order to establish dharma on this earth. So all that he performs, all that he does should help in the establishment of rules of conduct, codes of conduct, righteousness. But in this Krishna Lila, we see that Krishna danced with the gopis, with the cowherd girls. Some of them were wives of other men, and he drew them to him in the dead of the night. So all these incidents we find in Krishna Lila. How does this justify the coming of the Lord to establish righteousness? I do not understand this. Please explain it to me." Then Shukdev says, "O king, it is good you ask this question so that it will serve as a pointer to all humanity. Why did God perform this Leela?" Then you see the very beautiful explanation which Shukdev gives. He says, "See, these gopis of Vrindavan, whom Krishna played with, they were not ordinary cowherd girls. They were rishis incarnate, who had incarnated just to taste the divine bliss of the Lord, of Bhagavan. And they were so pure by their very nature, their very marrows were pure. So they perfectly reflected the bhav of Bhagavan in their hearts. So they were like little mirror images of the Lord. So when Krishna looked at them, he saw himself. And so he played with himself from his standpoint. He played with his own self. There were no gopikas there in his view. He was playing with himself. He saw his own bhav, his own expressions, his own sentiment, his own consciousness there. So he became one with them. And that is why that Leela took place. And from the standpoint of the gopikas, how did they view Krishna? This is in the Gopi Geetam, the song just before the Maharas started. So in that song, they clearly mention, it goes like this, Na khalu gopika nandanod bhavan akhila dehinam antaratmadrik. The gopikas say, "O Krishna, we know very well that you are not merely the son of Yashoda and Nanda. You are the indwelling Antaryami, the indweller of all living beings. You are that Sachidananda who is ever present in the hearts of all living beings. You are the Antaryamin, the indwelling one. This is how we see you. You are the inner controller." So you see, from their perception also, they only saw the Supreme Lord in Krishna and not a cowherd boy. So, O Parikshit, do not understand this Leela with mundane eyes. It is the highest expression of love where God saw only himself reflected in such pure mirrors, in such pure hearts. That is the Krishna Gopi Leela. So you see what a magnificent commingling of bhakti and jnana in this incident, and it is from the Bhagavatam. So all of our scriptures show this, the place of bhakti and jnana. In the Bhagavad Gita, I think it is best described because Bhagavad Gita has all the yogas there, and again a harmonization of the yogas. There you find Sri Krishna telling Arjun, "Chaturvidha bhajante mam, jana sukruti norjuna, arto jignasu artharthi, jnani cha bharatarshambha, tesham jnani nityayukta eka bhaktir vishishyate, priyo hi jnaninotyartham, aham sacha mama priyaha, udara sarva evaite, jnani atmaiva me matam." That is why Bhagavad Gita is the essence of the Upanishads. What is he saying? What is Lord Krishna telling us here? Chaturvidha bhajante mam. 4 types of people worship me. Who are they? Artho. Artha is the distressed, those who are in distress. Jignasu, the inquirer, Artharthi, one who is seeking wealth and the like, and Jnani, the knower of God. These 4 types of individuals, they worship me, they call upon me. All of them are good men, but the Jnani, he is dearest to my heart. Why? Eka Bhakti Vishishyate. He is Tesham Jnani Nitya Yukta Eka Bhakti Vishishyate. He is ever in touch with me, the Jnani. And how? Through Eka Bhakti, through one-pointed devotion to my essence. And that is why, as I am dear to him, he is also very dear to me. In fact, the Jnani is my very self. Jnani Atmaiva Me Matam, Krishna says. He is my very self. He is that dear to me. So you see, God himself is saying, from the standpoint of God, how does he perceive the Jnani? He has touched my very essence through his one-pointed devotion. That is the Jnani. I remember Raman Maharshi's words. He used to say, Bhakti is Jnana Mata. Bhakti is the very mother of Jnana. Because without one-pointed devotion, that level of consciousness will not unfold. So, what a beautiful description of Bhakti and Jnana. That is why the Bhagavad Gita has the very essence of the Upanishads. And we, like Arjun, should be able to drink this milk of the Gita. Every day a little study of the Gita will clear a lot of doubts in our mind. Many times people are asking doubts on spiritual life. The only way to solve doubts is not by intellectualizing something, but diving into sadhana and taking resort to scriptures like these. The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, the Bhagavad Gita, they have the power to clear all doubts. And they show us this mature path of the harmonization of yogas. So this is what the Bhagavad Gita says. In Sri Ramakrishna's life, you will see the Master himself demonstrated many times the movement from what he called Leela to the Nitya, the absolute, from the relative consciousness to the absolute consciousness, and then coming back to the relative consciousness with the wisdom and the knowledge of God, and seeing everything as filled with that divine consciousness. This experience you find in the life of Sri Ramakrishna. He used to technically call it Vijnan. He used to give this parable to show it. He used to say, you see, when one climbs to the roof, one climbs through stairs, isn't it? But when one reaches the roof, you climb the stairs and you go to the roof. But when you reach the roof, you see that the roof is verily made up of the very same stuff that the stairs are made up of. What are they made up of? Brick dust, lime, he says. Nowadays we would say cement. They are made up of the same stuff that the roof is made up of. So the absolute is consciousness. The relative also is an expression of that same consciousness. And from the absolute, you can come back to this Leela with that wisdom and knowledge and enjoy God as he expresses himself in this world of creation, of manifestation. He is verily the 24 cosmic principles. He is verily all that there is. So this point of realization can be reached where one sees God in everything. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, give this example. You see, some have heard of milk. Some have seen milk. Some have drunk milk and got nourished by it. So one who has just heard of milk is the one who has only studied about Brahman, who has only just heard about it. That's all. But one who has seen milk is the Jnani. He has known Brahman. He has experienced it in himself. And who is the Vijnani? One who has drunk milk, who experiences the supreme, the absolute, and comes back to the relative plane with that knowledge and sees that same being manifested everywhere. As this world of living beings, he gets nourished by that knowledge, Sri Ramakrishna says. So you see, These are very profound words of Sri Ramakrishna, which you will find again and again in the Gospel. He is actually showing us the movement of the mind from the relative to the absolute and back to the relative with the most profound knowledge of Brahman. So he would call this Vijnana. Let me give you another incident just to demonstrate how exactly this knowledge is to be entered into. Once Narendranath, who would be the future Vivekanand, he was sitting at the master's feet in Dakshineshwar. And Sri Ramakrishna was sitting on his cot. He suddenly turned to Naren and said, Naren, won't you plunge into the ocean of immortality? You will get everything when you plunge into it. Suppose you were a fly and I gave you a cup of syrup to enjoy. How would you enjoy that cup of syrup? And Narendranath says, why? I would sit in a corner at a particular edge and I would stick out my tongue and sip a little syrup. Because you see, if I went far into the cup of syrup, I might drown in it. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, Nare, not like that. This is the syrup of immortality. Satchidananda is the ocean of consciousness. How can you become unconscious by plunging into consciousness? How can you drown in it? You will become immortal if you plunge into it. You will become only more fully conscious, isn't it, if you plunge into consciousness? So, the state of Brahman is to be entered into. This is knowledge according to Vedanta. Brahman is to be known only when you become Brahman. Then only you can know it. Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. Consciousness is to be entered into. The essential unfoldment happens in our own awareness. It opens into full consciousness. It becomes fully aware. Pure awareness, because it is conscious by itself. The only thing which is self-luminous by itself, so it is called consciousness. So the more you plunge into it, the more liberated you will become, immortal you will become. So this beautiful description is there in Vedanta. It is called Tatastha Lakshana and Swarupa Lakshana. It is so magnificent. You see, this is how they illustrate this particular point. Suppose you were standing on an ocean front, on the beach, and I asked you to describe the ocean. Now you are standing on the tata. Tatastha means this only, standing on the bank of a river or the ocean. You are standing on the beach and I ask you to describe the ocean. How will you describe the ocean? Oh, it is so vast, full of water, and it reaches out to the horizons. You can hardly see what is beyond it. This is how you would describe it. But suppose I told you, now you enter the water and describe the ocean to me. When you enter the swarup of water, the feel of water, then how will you describe the ocean? You will say it is warm or cold. The feel of water, what it is like. This is how you will describe the ocean. So you describe Brahman, you know Brahman only by entering into it. Consciousness is not another vritti in the mind. It is only through meditation that you can plunge into it, enter into it. That is how you know it. So all these beautiful descriptions are there in Vedanta. Parallel description you will find in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Once Sri Ramakrishna tells M is again sitting in front of him. Sri Ramakrishna turns to him suddenly and says, you know, a man gets one kind of knowledge by reading in the scriptures. He gets another type of knowledge of God by practicing sadhana and meditation. And he gets a still another kind of knowledge, a totally different kind of knowledge, when God himself reveals himself to him. Then he says, just like how if you enter a room, a dark room, and you light a matchstick, as it dispels darkness suddenly, so also God lights up the human heart with his knowledge. Then you know him best. So you see such profound expressions of the highest. You will find it all in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. That is one book you shouldn't miss. It will make life worthwhile. Just reading and contemplating on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. let me come to one more incident before I conclude, because this is really discussing these great ideas from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, from the life of the Master. This itself is a sadhana in itself. Sri Ramakrishna says in the Gospel, you have come here to eat mangoes. Don't spend your time merely in counting the mango trees, in counting how many leaves on each tree, how many twigs or how many mangoes. Your job is to eat the mangoes. You have come here to plunge into the bliss of God. God realization is the only aim of human life. So see how you can attain that. Find the means to attain that and plunge into that, and you will know everything. You can get the highest knowledge of Brahman even through Bhakti, Sri Ramakrishna says. There is this marvelous incident regarding this Bhakti and Jnana in the life of one direct disciple of the Master called Swami Akhandanandji Maharaj. He was also called Gangadhar Maharaj. So later on he performed a lot of the service activities of the mission. He was a pioneer in that actually. And when he was a young monk in Alam Bazar Mutt, where the monastery initially started, he had this wonderful vision and experience, which I will briefly describe to you. See, he was in the Alam Bazar Mutt, and one day he was not feeling very well, so he decided to spend the night in meditation. He was sitting on his cot at night, and he suddenly started thinking, you see, these Pancha Bhavas of Vaishnavism, they are also, but all these bhavas and all this is within Maya. So they are refined forms of Maya only. The actual reality, the truth is this pure consciousness, the I, which is the substratum of all these expressions of Maya. Whether it is the gross body, subtle body, causal body, that which underlies all this, that pure I, pure awareness, that is the actual thing. And these bhavas and all this, it's okay, it is something very beautiful, but Vedanta is the actual thing. Now, as soon as he thought this, he had a marvelous vision. Suddenly, the whole place lit up. It is said, this happened not deep into the night, when it was not very far from dawn. So he suddenly had this vision where the whole place lit up with a kind of divine light, and there, right in front of him, he saw the most beautiful cherubic baby. So beautiful and such an innocent face, such expressions that he was simply, his heart was stolen away. He saw that this baby was well ornamented, was wearing a pearl necklace, his hair, his beautiful hair was tied up with a peacock feather and with flowers all around him, and his face bore such radiance, such an innocent beaming face, that he simply drowned in the sea of bliss just to see this baby. Then suddenly he heard somebody calling out so sweetly, and he saw Mother Yashoda there in the guise of those Vrajavasinis, in that form of dress, I mean, coming there with some food in her hand and calling out to Gopal, calling out to baby Krishna, come my darling, come and eat this, come my child, come here. And there was honey in her voice, in her every expression. She looked divine. And when Krishna came towards her to take the food in her hand, he was on all fours. As babies crawl, he came like that. She would be delighted. There was such delight in her voice when he came closer. Again, when he would eat a little and then move away from her in all fours, again the same longing in her voice. Come my Jadumani, Neelamani. This is how they address small children, that with so much of love and longing she's calling him. Seeing this magical sight, he was dumbfounded. It's happening before him. And then suddenly Sri Ramakrishna appeared there. And Sri Ramakrishna, with his dhoti on his shoulders, pointed out this sight to Akhandanandji Maharaj with his index finger, with his tarjani, and said, "Dak dekhi ki bhav, look at this magnificent sport of the Divine Lord." And Akhandanandji Maharaj's whole body was full of bliss. He was swimming in bliss, and he shouted out, "Oh Lord, I do not want nirvana. I do not want mukti. I would prefer to enjoy this bhav for hundreds of lifetimes." The very sight of that baby was so overwhelming. Then he went ahead to embrace all these divine beings, and suddenly the vision broke. He came back to normal consciousness. Then he got up stunned, with tears streaming down his eyes. He went out, he saw one of his brother disciples, Swami Ramakrishnanandji, who was actually preparing for the morning worship, and he went and told him about the vision, and both of them were full of delightful joy. So you see, bhakti has this power. It will transform you unasked. It will bring God to you unsought. So the power of divine emotion is like this. Sri Ramakrishna tells us in the gospel, a man must work towards these things. What is this work? He says spiritual practice, japa, meditation, prayer, even charities, dan, all of this constitutes the work which is to be performed in the form of sadhana in order to get these elevating, these great states of bhakti and jnana. And Sri Ramakrishna says, if you combine bhakti and jnana together without losing the intensity of either, you will attain to the goal of bhakti and jnana even sooner, faster, because you have combined all of your faculties. And let me conclude with this final observation of Sri Ramakrishna. He says, you want butter, you want the butter of spiritual realization, then you must make the effort to extract butter. What is the effort? He says, you must first bring milk, slightly warm it up, add a little amount of pure curd to it, allow it to settle, set as curd in a quiet corner without any disturbance for a long time. When the curd has been set, you churn it and you will get butter. This much effort is required. So, first get the milk, the requirements for our sadhana, for the quiet life, the intense life, the life of sadhana, the ambience you have to create. Bring in the Guru Kripa in the form of that which stimulates the setting of curd. So once you add that to the milk, to your sadhana, and then allow it to stay in a corner where it will remain undisturbed, then only the curd will set. Sadhana is like that. It is to be performed silently, without any disturbance, quietly, in a corner, mone bone kone. Finally, when the curd is set, you will have to churn it further. Churning, meditation. Remember, meditation is nothing but churning the mind. And the butter will come to the surface. The butter is the bliss of God consciousness, the essence of bhakti and jnana. So there is a way to attain it. I pray that Sri Ramakrishna bless us with this great devotion and love, and we attain to the fulfillment of this in this very life. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.